in the sands of time, knew there was something that I left behind. When I leave this world, I'll leave no regrets, leave something to remember, so they won't forget I was here. I lived, I loved, I was here. I did, I've done everything that I wanted, and it was more than I thought it would be. I will leave my mark so everyone will know I was here. I wanna say I lived each day until I died, and knew that I meant something in somebody's life. The hearts that I've touched will be the proof when I leave that I made a difference, and this world will see I was here. I lived, I loved, I was here. I did, I've done everything that I wanted, and it was more than I thought it would be. I will leave my mark so everyone will know I was here. I lived, I loved, I was here. I did, I've done everything that I wanted, and it was more than I thought it would be. I will leave my mark so everyone will know I was here. I just want you to know that I gave my all, did my best, brought someone some happiness, left this world a little better, just because I was here. I was here. I lived, I loved, I was here. I did, I've done everything that I wanted, and it was more than I thought it would be. I will leave my mark so everyone will know I was here. I lived, I loved, I was here. I was here. I was here. I was here.
Thank you, Ms. Janaea Clark, for such an inspiring performance. Professor Brian Copeland, Pro Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal, the UWI St. Augustine, Mr. Anand Pascal, President, Guardian Life of the Caribbean, Dr. Leroy Hill, Director, the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, UWI St. Augustine, Dr. Nancy Gleason, Director of the Hilary Ballon Center for Teaching and Learning, and Associate Professor of Practice in Political Science, New York University, Abu Dhabi. Specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the 2021 Biennial UWI Guardian Group Premium Open Lecture. I am Dr. Justin Zefrin, your Master of Ceremony for this evening's proceedings. This event continues to add to the long history of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, otherwise known as the CETL, spanning almost 25 years. During this time, the Center has worked diligently toward the enhancement of the teaching and learning process through various ventures such as training workshops, graduate programs, teaching awards, and premium open lectures such as this evening's event. With the dynamic and more recent educational context, the CETL has expanded its reach through webinars, online resources and graduate programs, and also online events such as this evening's proceedings. Throughout the years, the CETL has promoted the practice and scholarship of teaching and learning, focusing on the importance of instructional design, educational assessments, reflective practice, and educational technology. John Biggs, 2003, postulated that there is no teaching if learning has not occurred. And as such, the CETL has focused extensively on educators, with the ultimate goal of enhancing students' learning and performance. As seen in today's event, the CETL's influence goes beyond the campus, catering to educators throughout the country and the wider Caribbean. Informed by the current landscape of education, this year marks the first time that this event is delivered online. And this is indicative of the CETL's commitment to meet the needs of all educational stakeholders, locally, regionally, and globally. This evening's event marks the 21st anniversary of the Premium Teaching Series and the long-standing partnership with Guardian Group, which was initiated by Dr. Betty Ann Roller, sustained by Dr. Annamae Edwards-Henry and the late Dr. Margot Burns, and will continue under the directorship of Dr. Leroy Hill, the director of the CETL STA campus. The theme of this evening's proceedings, Navigating the Realm of the E-Classroom, Creating Effective Culture for Innovation and Change, is a direct reflection of the current landscape of education and the CETL's role in enhancing the teaching and learning process. As such, we look forward to this evening's proceedings so that we can acquire useful tips that we can apply to our professional practice. At this time, I invite Professor Brian Copeland, Pro Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal of the UWI St. Augustine campus, to bring remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Zefrin. On behalf of the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies, I am pleased to welcome our many guests, local, regional, and international, as we gather virtually for the 2021 UWI Guardian Group Premium Open Lecture. Allow me to offer you a special welcome and a thank you to Dr. Nancy Gleason for agreeing to speak to us on a topic that has become increasingly critical and relevant in this time of pandemic. While the University of the West Indies immediately pivoted to online delivery upon closure of all schools, including tertiary level institutions, and this was in March 2020, it has unquestionably been hard and often painful for both faculty and students. In these last long 18 months, we have learned how to work, learn, and meet, and celebrate virtually with technology as an increasingly critical tool. We have not been able to physically meet and freely engage with our students, or they with us. In an interconnected world, we have been managing, not always well, but impeded by a sense of being disconnected from others. The UWI's vision through its Center for Teaching and Learning, or CETL, as they are more familiarly called, is to promote our regional institution as the vanguard for excellence in tertiary level teaching, learning, research, and innovation. These institutional outputs are key to our strategy of revitalizing Caribbean economies and bringing notable value globally. We are therefore committed to providing a dynamic environment in which student learning is pursued as our primary goal, and in support of that goal, excellence in teaching is recognized and rewarded. In this regard, we are fully cognizant of the fact that our hard pivot to online delivery requires a different approach, both in pedagogy and educational technology. CETL has become the driving force in this pivot to online teaching and learning. And I thank the CETL team, along with our IT team, immensely. But I understate the importance of CETL in the UWI vision for excellence in tertiary level education. Like other institutions of higher learning, the UWI must face a post-COVID existence that is highly uncertain. In the face of the economic challenges it faced even pre-COVID, now heightened by the pandemic itself, it must now grow its global reputation into revenue in order to survive and to achieve its mission. Now, to do this, the UWI must, as the Vice Chancellor has stated on many an occasion, it must now more aggressively expand beyond the region into the larger global space. Success in that highly competitive space will, inter alia, require that we solidify, consolidate, and build upon our core competence in teaching and learning, and that our lecturers, our instructors, our teaching and research assistants be among the best masters of pedagogy. You have done well, Settle, exceedingly well, but the future demands that you up your game and go beyond those stellar achievements. Now, 23 years ago, Dr. Betty Ann Roller of our then Instructional Development Unit, pre-Settle, presented a novel idea to Guardian Life, seeking but not quite sure of receiving the company's support. The intent was simple: honor and reward teaching excellence at the St. Augustine campus, and in this way, drive a culture committed to dynamic student-centered learning. Now, at the time, such a collaborative effort was a groundbreaking initiative. We will always be grateful to the Guardian Group for their immediate and positive response to the Premium Teaching Awards project. Later, of course, the awards were alternated with a Premium Teaching Lecture with featured speakers who are internationally renowned educators and would be extended to our sister campuses at Mona and Caville. These premium open lectures expose our internal and external communities to visionary thinking and best practice. But the UWI Guardian Group collaboration was groundbreaking in another way. The working committee comprises both corporate and academia and is distinguished by the intensity of their collaboration, exercised throughout the joint planning right up to successful execution. It has been so for all of the 23 years that these awards have been in existence. As I thank them for the dedication and commitment to continuous improvement that each team has consistently demonstrated, I wish also to acknowledge the late Dr. Margot Burns, who has, since 2016 and until her passing, been Director of Settle as well as Program Coordinator for the Certificate of University Teaching and Learning, or CUTL as it's known. Since March 2020 and the physical closure of the campus, Margot and her team at Settle played a crucial role in training and developing faculty to switch to fully remote teaching. As chair of the UWI Guardian Group Cross-Organizational Committee, she is remembered as someone as inclusive in her approach, a leader and a listener. Thank you, Margot. May I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Justin Zefrin for taking on the responsibility of leadership, albeit in an acting capacity, and Dr. Leroy Hill, who has taken up the baton as our newly minted Director of Settle. While the challenges in 2020 of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic did not allow us to stage the Premium Teaching Awards, I am hopeful that the strategies for success in online teaching and learning that you, Dr. Gleason, will share this evening will not only enlighten us in terms of trends, but also suggest ways in which we can restart in 2022 the biennial recognition of excellence in teaching through the Premium Teachers Awards. Many years ago, CARICOM identified that an educated workforce is crucial to the development of this region. CARICOM had not factored in a pandemic, nor did they factor in the challenges that it would bring. We are, however, now in the next normal, a learning curve for all and everyone. From a practical perspective, Settle continues to provide us with the required training and development, this lecture being just one example. From an emotional perspective, we have had to give ourselves grace to adapt while being patient with each other as we seek to make courtesy, efficiency, timeliness, and professionalism our reputational norm in service to our publics, most significantly to our students. I wish to share the findings of an interesting World Economic Forum article co-authored by Purnima Luthra and Sandy McKenzie, about the ways COVID-19 could affect how we educate future generations. Luthra and Mackenzie identified 4. First, educating citizens in an interconnected world, where successful people must be able to understand this interrelatedness and navigate across boundaries to leverage their differences and work in a globally collaborative way. Secondly, a redefined role of the educator, who is no longer the all-knowing knowledge holder. Our students can access knowledge, learn a technical skill through a few ticks on their phones, tablets, or computers. This could mean the role of educators will move towards facilitating young people's development as contributing members of society. Thirdly, teaching life skills needed for the future, like navigating a pandemic. Our young people require more than ever resilience and adaptability. Apart from technical expertise, our graduates must demonstrate their creative communication and collaborative skills, as well as empathy and emotional intelligence. According to the authors, they must be able to work across demographic lines of differences to harness the power of the collective through effective teamwork. Lastly, unlocking technology to deliver education is not unique to the UWI. Like us, educational institutions across the world have had to rapidly harness and utilize available technological tools to create content for remote learning for students in all sectors. There are benefits and downsides. Either way, it is an exciting new world. Now, among other things, our feature speaker, Dr. Nancy Gleason, has considered the societal impacts of education, employment disruption, and the need for continuous reskilling. The role of industry in supporting upskilling of adults in the 4th industrial revolution. The 4th industrial revolution, she says, is the automation of knowledge versus the automation of physical labor. Interesting. It is about the automation of cognitive tasks and pattern-based work. What does this all mean for learning and for the future of work? I suggest that this is the right audience, academic and corporate, to listen to and learn from all that she has to say. I'm very much looking forward to today's lecture. If we are to make a difference in education, in teaching, and in learning for a disruptive society such as the one in which we now live, then we are required to ramp up and prepare ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Copeland. You have provided substantive insight to teaching and learning at the UWI St. Augustine campus, particularly during the current dispensation. I now invite Mr. Pascal, President of Guardian Life of the Caribbean Limited, to offer remarks on behalf of the Guardian Group.
Distinguished guests, good afternoon. On behalf of the Guardian Group, I'd like to welcome everyone, particularly our feature speaker, Dr. Nancy Gleason, and we look forward to hearing your words on this evening's topic, navigating the realm of the e-classroom, creating effective culture for innovation and change. This is a topic that one should realize is quite relatable to everyone in attendance. The past year and a half has plunged us into a virtual environment which saw an ever-constant need to pivot to maintain relevance in our respective arenas. Everything was upended: work life, family life, social lives. There has been constant change. The relationship between culture, innovation, and change is an interesting one, especially in the light of a pandemic. Given that, the absence of any one of these is likely to severely impact the overall success of what one sets out to do. For yet another year, the Guardian Group is pleased to partner with the University of the West Indies, Professor Brian Copeland and his excellent team, to conduct this event. This time around, we too find ourselves being able to execute on this occasion not by simply delivering a premium open lecture, but also by utilizing the technology that has become so invaluable to us all to ensure that there's continuity in excellence. Guardian Group is no stranger to change and evolution, and is happy to share this journey with the University of the West Indies. It goes without saying that to truly innovate and transform, all parties concerned must believe in the change and develop a culture that is biased towards innovation and change. The very distinguished Francis Hasselbein is quoted as saying, "Culture does not change because we desire it to change. Culture changes when the organization is transformed. The culture reflects the realities of people working together every day." COVID-19 has brought us new realities, and it is simply untenable to embrace a world where digitization does not form a part. I, for one, am definitely excited to see the continuous evolution of the digital world and can only imagine what it will look like as the generations to come embrace the e-classroom. While there is much discussion surrounding online teaching platforms, particularly at younger ages, the many years of this partnership seemed to be preparing us for this pandemic by aiming to create teachers to guide the minds that are being created as these new modes of educational delivery steer our young bright stars to lead societies, albeit through different means. To close, I leave you with the words of Peter Drucker. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. I challenge everyone here this afternoon to confront the many hurdles that lie ahead and focus on the opportunities before us that are undoubtedly going to continue to guide, gently or turbulently, us to new innovative ways of approaching whatever life throws at us. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Pascal, for acknowledging the rich history of our partnership with Guardian Group and for recognizing the importance of education. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite Dr. Leroy Hill, Director of the CETL UWI St. Augustine campus, to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Zefrin. It is with great honor that I introduce our distinguished lecturer and featured speaker for this evening, Dr. Nancy W. Gleason. Dr. Nancy W. Gleason is the director of the Hilary Ballon Center for Teaching and Learning and an associate professor of practice in political science at the New York University, Abu Dhabi. Her research focuses on the fourth industrial revolution's impact on higher education and the future of work. She considers societal impacts of education, employment disruption, continuous reskilling, and the role of industry in supporting upskilling of adults. She is the editor of Higher Education in the Era of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. She is also the co-editor of the special issue in Diversity and Inclusion in Higher Education, Lessons from Across Asia. Dr. Gleason holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, a Master's of Science from London School of Economics, and a Bachelor's of Arts from George Washington University. Join me in welcoming Dr. Gleason as she presents this year's UWI Guardian's Premium Open Lecture, Navigating the Realm of the E-Classroom, Creating Effective Culture for Innovation and Change. Dr. Gleason, I now invite you to take us through this evening's lecture.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. And thank you to Dr. Copeland and Dr. Hill and all the organizers of this Guardian Premium Virtual Open Lecture. I'm delighted to be with all of you today. I'm going to be speaking with you about navigating the e-classroom for innovation and change today. We will discuss the disrupted world and higher education's role in it, how to foster our lifelong learners for active learning, and how technology plays a role and the best ways for measuring learning in the e-classroom. Thank you for joining me on this talk today. First, I want to talk about COVID-19 and the unexpected and unprecedented challenges it's presented to all of us as educators. We've had to learn from home emergency instruction, shift courses online, and shift our planning and activities and assessment. It's exposed increased inequities in access to the resources of education. And our students and faculty are facing significant mental health challenges. This is the context within which we are trying to navigate the e-classroom. It's the next normal of disruption. And this is happening amongst a shifting talent demand from the labor force because of the shifts in the fourth industrial revolution. Here in my slides, you see the 8 different technologies that are making up these changes: artificial intelligence, augmented reality, blockchain or distributed ledger technology, drones, the Internet of Things, robotics, virtual reality, and 3D printing, also known as additive manufacturing. Together, these technologies change what it means to live and work in our societies, especially our urban cities. Once we have 5G network capability and other emerging technologies such as soft haptics and quantum computing, these technological capabilities will be amplified. The result is the tasks that are being performed in the workplace by humans are changing. Pattern-based work is now automatable. When different jobs are deconstructed by organizations, the pattern-based work is replaced by algorithms and machines. And the more dynamic and shifting work is something that we need to train our students to be able to handle. This requires resilience and agility, something we've been forced to demonstrate during a remote emergency instruction in COVID-19. Here we see some of the ways in which firms are deconstructing and reinventing jobs. The optimizing task for the goals of the organization is taking place, and what is able to be automated is beginning to be automated. This rolls out more quickly or slowly in different industries. For example, suddenly radiologists are being automated. The key task they perform of looking for patterns that represent cancers and other illnesses in humans are now able to be done much better and quickly by algorithms. So we can reconfigure the tasks that radiologists perform, perhaps communicating better with patients, for example, but they need to be retrained and reskilled. This is why interactions with our students are so important. We need to figure out how we help our students learn in a disrupted world, such as the case of the radiologist that needs to redefine themselves in the workplace while keeping their job. And we also need to figure out in the academic context how we connect to employability while still staying true to our academic freedoms and not purpose fitting for a given industry without expanding the broader knowledge and context of those disciplinary expertise. Information transfer is a necessary and insufficient characteristic of higher education today. It is no longer sufficient to simply lecture information to students. Recording lectures, posting them synchronously or asynchronously, however you're getting that information to students, it's the beginning of the journey, not the purpose of the course. This is what's changing in higher education. The number 2 skill in demand in the workplace today is active learning and learning strategies. This according to the World Economic Forum, but also according to many in the employability and talent fields and world. This means no matter what we're teaching our students, we need to talk to them about the process of their learning, not just the outcome of their performance on a given test or exam. This is true whether this is quantitative or qualitative work that the students are putting out. It's not just the formula, it's how they solved it. This is what employers are looking for too, because what they need to know in the workplace today will change in the next 5 years. So employers need people willing to change with them and the industries they work in. Active learning is an element of lifelong learning, where the characteristics can be quantified. This is the American Association of Colleges and Universities rubric for lifelong learning. It's any purposeful learning activity undertaken on an ongoing basis with the aim of improving knowledge, skills, and competence. This is what we want to embed as a mindset and a goal in our students. When we are in the e-classroom, we can change how we've been talking to students, enhance the emphasis on these characteristics and traits, and use our course content to deliver awareness, cognitive awareness of those skills. Now, these skills are curiosity, initiative, independence, the ability to transfer knowledge from one context to a new novel context, and the ability to reflect on what we know, to learn and unlearn new things. So these are the skills we want to embed in our courses. These are the skills we want to embed in our learning objectives, in our assessments, and in what we measure. Active learning is how we get there, by being student-centered rather than content-centered in what we're delivering. Yes, the content matters, it's essential, but as I said, it's insufficient, sorry. So how do we empower our students to pursue active learning in the e-classroom? How do we get them to engage differently than they might have in the pre-pandemic face-to-face environment, which may have been passive absorption of information? And how can technology help us get there? For students to learn new skills, they need practice applying those skills and to receive high quality, consistent feedback on that practice. And there are technology-rich activities that we can use to align to our learning objectives, but technology should not just simply be laid out there. For example, simply turning on the discussion forum in the learning management system isn't sufficient. We need good prompts. We need to embed it in the learning objectives. We need to tell the students exactly how to perform in that discussion forum. And so as educators, our opportunity, not just our obligation, but our opportunity is to work with librarians and educational technologists and the literature from our disciplines to explore ways that technology can capture student thinking, not just measure student academic integrity. This is where the benefits of the e-classroom and what we've learned during COVID-19's remote instruction can really help us improve as educators. So technology can help by providing students with visual ways to organize their knowledge and can help them remember and use that knowledge and measure their ability to use that knowledge. But this is also about us as educators organizing the knowledge, skills, and competencies we want them to have in the classroom and beyond the classroom. How do your students demonstrate their learning? Is it through a survey, a Qualtrics test, multiple choice questions, essays, equations? What are you measuring when you mark those assessments? Is there a 5% off for being late? And does that demonstrate knowledge? Why do we need them to be 5 minutes? To be in time for the deadline? What are we reinforcing at that point in a society where we're asking everybody to be more flexible because of the negative impacts of the pandemic? Similarly, what does attendance mean? Camera on, camera off, on time, engaging, posting in the chat? How do we define this for them? And how do we help let technology give them ways to feel comfortable in participation? My answer is to align to the learning objectives of the course. Here is a nice schematic on the active verbs we can use in learning objectives on syllabi. And the color scheme should align to the pitch of the course and whether or not students are being introduced to a concept, practicing deploying that concept, or demonstrating skill in that concept. So introduction, practice, demonstrating. So for example, in a lower level course, it doesn't mean that students don't begin with higher order thinking around evaluating and creating new knowledge, but the weight that that receives in your assessment would be lower. And new knowledge can be low stakes or no stakes. Just practice using the information, right? And in this way, you could send out an electronic quiz, but not grade it. Just show people where they're at. This decreases the inclination towards academic integrity breaches or cheating. So we think about these verbs and we think about the technologies available to us, whether that be the learning management system, Google Docs, or breakout rooms in the Zoom classroom or the Moodle classroom. And then how can we use those different techniques to allow students to practice their thinking capabilities, to apply the skills and competencies we want them to have without feeling threatened by the grade outcome. Grades are good to incentivize motivation, but there's other ways to do that. And sometimes technology is a nice way to help students see that they're learning without being subjected to those assessments. Similarly, using these verbs and thinking about lifelong learning, that curiosity, that independence, that initiative, as part of metacognition is really valuable. So here in this schematic, you see the cognitive process dimension that many people are familiar with. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. But we also then on the other side have the knowledge dimension, facts, concepts, procedures, and metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. So we remember facts, we understand concepts, but as we build those cognitive abilities, these are literally building blocks, which is why I like this schematic. You need to buttress the higher order thinking and the higher metacognition with these lower order thinking skills. And that includes content, but that's why the content is insufficient. In the e-classroom, we can get students to think about their own use of techniques, to deconstruct their own biases and reflect on their own progress. We can do it in the face-to-face classroom as well, and we will again someday, or the mask-to-mask classroom as some countries are experiencing now. But talking to students about these skills and competencies, embedding our disciplines in them, and connecting them to what our students care about is the best way forward, based on the literature and student feedback. This is what they want. They want it to be real, authentic, about them and their relationship to the world. And this is repeated in many places about Generation Z contexts. So the competencies to foster can be expressed in our learning objectives, but also in our assessments. So on the left here, you see affects and competencies that are often expressed as goals of higher education. The ability to perform inquiry and analysis or demonstrate creative thinking, good written and oral communication skills. But how do we put these into the syllabi and then into the e-classroom? We could do an activity where we ask students to design processes and identify strategies for doing something rather than actually going and doing it. This is something we can do in the e-classroom. What would you learn from a museum in another country if you could? For example, ask the students to design a process for learning about a museum and what it has inside. This is about problem solving, right? So this is a way to deconstruct the skill into actions that you can assess and provide feedback on. Here's another schematic. You can see I'm a fan of schematics. But here we have comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and knowledge in the purple. These are the languages of Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking expressed slightly differently. And this is taken from the Ministry of Education here in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. In the yellow ring, they have the learning objectives. In the green ring, they have samples of the types of assignments or outcome products that help students practice and demonstrate those skills. So for comprehension, which is where we normally give basic tests and quizzes, we might say, discuss a concept, paraphrase an argument, confirm a given hypothesis. And the way they might do this is through diagrams, posters, graphs, constructed analogies, presenting a speech, maybe making a podcast. But we can assess comprehension in so many more engaging ways than a multiple choice exam, for example. And I know many of you already know that. It's also about time and efficiency. Where do we get the time to design these new activities, create the rubrics for these new activities, and grade these new activities when we're already stretched at home and at work because of the pandemic? Totally viable question. And there are ways in which we can use technology to make this more efficient. So for example, we can design an online active learning activity where the students brainstorm within a Google Doc. Now here you're going to have to ask them to turn off their cameras because they may not have the bandwidth to run both the online course assignment and the system that they're streaming to be available via video. So you may tell everyone we're going to leave the Zoom call, or whichever platform you're using. We're going to go into the Google Doc in small groups, and everyone's going to answer a question. This way, the faculty member, you, the instructor, can go in and aggregate the different ideals that are coming from a single list from the students, or from multiple lists if you have a very large class. So if you have 200 students, you could break the groups up into groups of 10, have 20 different rooms, for example. And you can monitor the brainstorming processes that's happening across those rooms. You're allowing the students to practice categorizing and differentiating class concepts. These can be equations, vocabulary, authors' different opinions, whatever your disciplinary need. But it lets you see where there may be specific questions or consistent lack of clarity on an issue in real time, so that you can bring everybody back to the group, away from the Google Docs, and have an open discussion. Now, if you have 200 students, you could ask people to report out. Say you had 200 students and you had those 10 groups of 20, you could call on 3 groups to report out. You could invite them all to look at each other's Google Docs by sharing the links in the chat, for example. And then you as the instructor or your teaching assistants can look for patterns during the class or after the class to pull out from those brainstorming exercises. Similarly, mini mind map exercises are great ways to help the students visualize and construct their understanding of information. And this one is very hard to cheat on if you come up with interesting prompts or course-specific ways to connect the knowledge. Here, this is a linear example I'm giving on arranging terms in logical order in biology using arrows, but mind maps can be much more complex than that if you want them to be. So here I have an example where a student is using highlighters and different shapes to denote different types of relationships. And here what you want to do is focus on the instructions and then have students reflect on that process. So you as the educator create focused questions that will guide the student to make these mini maps, and they can be in groups. Again, if you have 200 students, the dialogical learning that can happen in groups of 5 is very exciting. And you cut the grading down to 20% by putting them in groups of 5, right? You're looking at much fewer mind maps. You generate a list of relevant concepts and organize them before constructing them. The students need to do this. And then you ask them to reflect and revise on their mind maps. Maybe they provide a brief audio message explaining them, and the students go in and explore and comment in a discussion forum. Again, this isn't necessarily graded. It can be, but it's a learning activity to help embed the concepts for them. And again, alternative resources can help motivate students to dig into this material. So if you're going to do a brainstorming exercise or a mini mind map or something like that, what new material can they dissect in order to dig into this outside the textbook? So are there virtual field trips they could make to connect resources in a library or a virtual laboratory to a concept or a philosophy that's being explored in your course? How can you bring your own research into the classroom and show them how you make these connections? Could you bring in a guest lecturer from within Trinidad and Tobago or outside, whatever the purpose of the course, to connect them to the global world and motivate them to feel connected to that global world as a global citizen? So sometimes students like to be passive absorbers of information, and showing a good movie is a great way to do that. Just accompany with it with some kind of task, some kind of reflective practice. Where do they see the vocabulary in action in the movie? Where do they see use of the mathematical competencies inside the documentary? Where do they see examples of the various concepts you're discussing in your course in the movie. Teach them to pull that out of the real world into the classroom. And if you're going to do all these things, of course, you have to rethink your methods of assessment. Here, I want you to ask yourself, which kinds of assessment best demonstrate the skills and knowledge of your learning objectives on your syllabus? Are the assessment practices you're using simply the easiest to grade? Or are they actually helping measure learning in your course? Maybe it's a bit of both. Do they need to be enhanced? Could you check on them? And is there a way technology could make this better for them and more efficient for you? These are the questions to ask 18 months into this pandemic. What can we be doing differently? And what have we already learned that's easy to apply? Alternative assessments to in-person tests are all over the internet right now. Academic integrity is a concern, and wanting to dig deeper in the learning is also a concern. So you can consider video presentations, podcasts, visual assignments, multimedia deliverables of all kinds. You can use automated grading platforms such as Perusall. Perusall uses a reading annotation project, which is ideal for courses around 40 to 80 students. And it's automated grading, and it gives great feedback to the students. It's a good assignment. And even if you don't trust it to do your grading, which you can look into, but it's very well vetted, you could use it as a learning tool. And you can always use peer feedback. But if you do that, teach them how to give good feedback in your discipline. Giving feedback is one of the main things we do in the professional world. So teaching them how to give peer feedback is a very good use of your time and theirs. Add it to the learning objectives if it's not there. And no matter what you do, when you change or augment or enhance your types of assignments for the e-classroom, think about the prompts that you're writing for your students. What do you want the assignments to require the students to do? And tell them that. You want to think about how students define, illustrate, or compare or analyze the data you're asking them to use. Have them understand the research requirements. It's different for each of us as faculty members, what we expect, and it's not intuitive to them. So tell them what they need to do. If you can, be flexible. And then when you've designed all of this, try and do the assignment yourself. Because one of the things we're finding in the e-classroom is that students' workloads have greatly increased. While faculty and instructors work to change 1 hour of face-to-face synchronous instruction into hours of asynchronous homework. So try and do the assignment yourself, see how long it takes you, and consider whether or not that's an appropriate amount of time to ask your students to pursue these assignments. And bring the real world into your assessments or just into your classroom conversations. Try to compare and contrast how museums, theaters, and concert halls have been impacted by self-isolation and confinement efforts in 2 different countries, for example. Or how will TNT address Carnival 2022, given the public health crisis? Bring these ideas to your students. See them as problem solvers. They will like being asked and they will want to find solutions. The assessment then is in the process of finding the solution, not the value per se of the outcome. So you want to construct a rubric that rewards the process of identifying the solutions. This can be in a research proposal. This could be in a draft. This could be in assessing the quality of the bibliographic resources they identify. But breaking that broader assessment down into parts lets them apply that real world context, that authentic learning, to the processes we want them to develop as lifelong learners and active learners. If you do all these things, write it down. Document your efforts. Survey the students and ask them if they like what you're doing and how you're doing it. Ask them what they like about what you're doing. Invite a colleague into your Zoom class. It's so much easier for us to enjoy each other's teaching right now. because we don't have to make all the commute time to come to each other's schedules. If you're in hospitality, visit engineering. If you're in engineering, visit the arts. If you're in economics, visit the sciences. Learn what each other are doing across disciplines, and then give each other feedback on that. You can also collect data from your LMS analytics, but there you want to realize that's just raw data. So you have to give it meaning on its own. Students not downloading the readings doesn't mean they aren't doing the readings, for example. It likely means they're not using Moodle to find the readings. So these are the kinds of things you want to corroborate by asking your students what the context of this is. But by making your good teaching visible and documenting it, you make a narrative for your teaching trajectory over time that can be used in tenure, promotion, renewal, and can be used for applying for teaching awards, teaching-based grants, and many other things, new jobs. So always document all this effort. It's time consuming. It shows a reflective practice on your part, and it's good work. So make sure you write it down in a way that you can tell other people you're doing that good work. So it's not invisible. So I invite you to think about what enhancements you can make in your e-classroom and course structure. What have you already learned that you want to better evidence is working, right? So could you add a question to a midterm course evaluation to ask the students if they like an assignment that's new that you've created? And I don't just mean like, but what elements of it have helped their learning, right? These are the kinds of questions you want to ask your students to check if these interventions are working, to check if it's having the intended effects on how your students are motivated in the e-classroom. And everything I've said doesn't matter if you don't have the ability to center your own wellness, spirituality, and self-care. We know that this pandemic is traumatic. It's ongoing. We are not done in any way, shape, or form. We're 18 months in. We're more used to the reality of masks and social distancing and missing family members. But the types of self-care we have to pursue need to be much more targeted and conscious. Talking to each other, letting our students know we see them. We know this is hard. And the number one thing we can all do, regardless of ethnic, religious, identity differences, is work on our sleep together. We all have the same brains that need the same amount of sleep. Lack of sleep hurts learning, increases stress, can cause physical unwellness. So when we talk to our students about how they prioritize their learning, we need to talk to them about, for example, not pulling all-nighters. It's not good for them. I don't let assignments be due past 8 p.m. I will not accept an assignment between 8 p.m. and 9 a.m. Can you message that kind of wellness to your students as well? And can you talk to them about the wellness you pursue for yourself? As educators, as parents, as family members, and as friends, we are tired. So centering this wellness before everything else I mentioned is extremely important. So reflecting on that for yourself as well is very important. And with that, I'm very excited to transition into the question and answer section with all of you and speak with Dr. Zefrin, with all of you about your reactions to this presentation and what enhancements you hope to take to the e-classroom next. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gleason, for such an insightful presentation. I am confident that it has further equipped all educational stakeholders with the necessary information and tips which we can implement in our teaching and learning contexts. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I invite Mr. Emmanuel Joseph to the stage as we proceed into a short interlude. Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel Joseph, for that invigorating performance. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we commence our question and answer segment. We acknowledge, first of all, the eclectic representation from various institutions locally, regionally, and internationally, including the UWI's Mona, Cave Hill, St. Augustine, and open campuses, local primary schools, as well as secondary and tertiary educational institutions. And of course, we also have with us the Intellectual Property Office, as well as in our live stream, we have with us persons from the USA, from Jamaica, and so on. So we acknowledge you, and we thank you for joining us for this evening's proceedings. As we segue into our question and answer segment, we ask that you kindly submit your questions and comments via the YouTube chat on your screen. These will be addressed by our guest lecturer. So, Dr. Gleason, are you there?
I am indeed. Hello.
Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. You know, some of the salient points that I noted, some of them, I want to call them fast facts, 5 fast facts maybe, or tips, you know, with one of them being faculty or teachers being flexible with deadlines, yeah? And I think that is all part of being, taking a student-centered approach to teaching, yeah? Another point you raised is to test or preview the alternative or authentic assessment before administering it to students, yeah? Another one is bring the real world in. In other words, make it relevant, make it contemporary. So I hope these are some notes that our attendees are making as well. Document your efforts, and this is all part and parcel of the reflective practice. And might I just add that this is also part of what will be a requirement for persons interested in applying for our virtual teaching awards next year. So I think part of that reflective practice, documenting your efforts, is integral. And of course, number 5, taking baby steps. Yeah, taking baby steps, trying new things bit by bit, taking an incremental approach. You know, there's this saying that Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think the transition to remote teaching and learning is likewise, yeah? So you do bit by bit, and of course reflect on the little bits that you've done as you go along. Dr. Gleason, I have one question. Just to understand, you know, perhaps teaching and learning in your particular context, what has been the biggest challenge in returning to masked learning in your teaching context? I know even though we share similarities between, let's say, in Trinidad and Tobago and other parts of the Caribbean, and even in over by you, what are some of the challenges or hurdles, I would say, in returning to masked learning, for example?
Sure, this is an important question and something to consider as this potentially happens for UWI in the future. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to be inclusive of all of the diversity our students bring while you're wearing a mask. Some students can't hear you. Some students don't understand the accent, particularly my thick American accent. Some students can't read the social cues. Some faculty can't read the social cues of only exclusively eye contact. So the masks produce some challenges in that regard. Solutions can be wearing a microphone on your lapel, if you can get access to one. I use very wordy slides and I hand them out ahead of time so that the students have something to follow, even though it may be difficult to hear me. Yes. And then there are other challenges with the fact that maybe not your whole class can return, or maybe one of them may contract COVID-19 or be a close contact and not be able to attend. So as faculty, we have to be ready to pivot to hybrid, where we may have to produce materials for remote students that are joining synchronously in the classroom. And here the Google Doc is a really, really important tool because they can all log in and access it. It doesn't require too much bandwidth. So they can engage with the class and turn off their camera, but you can see them participating.
Yes.
So this is a good question. I don't think we have all the answers. Most universities know that the hybrid situation doesn't work very well, but it solves some of the face-to-face assessment challenges that faculty are very worried about during remote instruction and the academic integrity question.
Right. Great, great. Thank you so much for that. We have a question that was posted in the chat. And I like that, to segue nicely, as you mentioned, the hybrid approach and so on. One attendee stated that for now it's only remote, but I think virtual will be part of a hybrid or dynamic approach in the future. What elements of virtual learning will we keep? In other words, what elements of this current dispensation of remote teaching and learning will carry on or carry through should we go back to a blended approach or a hybrid approach, for example?
I think a lot of educators around the world have learned that lecturing alone is not necessary. You can record that lecture, you don't have to do that live.
Yes.
So I think when we do come back face to face, what we actually do in the classroom activities will change. I hope it changes. I hope that we don't use our synchronous face-to-face time to deliver information, but rather we use that time to design activities to talk about, perform, practice those skills and competencies that apply the knowledge. So what we used to call a flipped classroom, I think actually has been catapulted into just good teaching. And I hope that when we are on the other side of the pandemic, whenever that may be, that faculty embrace this opportunity to not use their live time to deliver new content.
Indeed, indeed. One of the things, and thank you for that response as well. I'm hopeful that our attendees are taking notes that they can implement in their teaching context. One of the things that you mentioned is alternative assessments and/or authentic assessments. Is there a difference between the two? And I think you alluded to it, you explained to an extent. So can you elaborate or maybe recap what are the differences between alternative assessments and authentic assessments?
Sure. So authentic assessments are a type of alternative assessment, but there are many different types. Now, alternative assessments help measure what students can do with knowledge, yes, rather than what they know. And alternative assessments provide a means of assessing the skills we value that cannot be directly assessed with traditional tests. Authentic assessment is a piece of that because you're using creative learning experiences in the real world to test student skills and knowledge in realistic situations. The authenticity comes from the application. The alternative part is not testing people with multiple choice questions. I hope that helps answer the question.
Indeed, indeed. And thank you so much for that. And the reason, that has been, even in our university context, something that has been used almost synonymously or interchangeably. So we really needed, and thank you for that clarification as well, because there are several differences and important differences between the two. And that segues nicely into another question on alternative assessments. And I hope this person is referring to alternative assessments as opposed to authentic assessments. But either way, how do we compare years while experimenting with different alternative assessments each year? And let me read that again. How do we compare across years while experimenting with different alternative assessments each year? So I'm assuming that that attendee is saying that if alternative assessments vary from year to year, how do we do a sort of comparative approach across different years? Yeah?
Yeah, yes, it's a very smart question, because if we're reflecting on our practice, we should be looking at how learning changes over time
Yes.
for our courses. But the assessment doesn't change the learning objectives for the course. If you change the learning objectives for the course, typically that means you have to send your syllabus back to some form of a curricular committee in the university.
Yes.
So we don't often change the learning objectives, but you can always change the assessments. The learning objectives are what don't change. Now, if you're trying to determine the viability of the assessment relative to the learning objective, you can ask students their perceptions of that over time. Did this help you learn? And see if some get more on a spectrum towards yes than no. But the learning objectives don't change. The assessments do.
Yes.
In the format of the question you gave.
Yes, definitely. And I think that shows the alignment between the learning outcomes and the assessments. And I want to also acknowledge the presence of Dr. Anna Mae Edwards-Henry. And there's a reason for that, because we're talking about assessments, and she is known as one of the queens of assessments, educational assessments. So hopefully she may provide some input in the chat. All right, and also I think Dr. Betty Ann Roullet is here as well, so we acknowledge them, as well as Dr. Leroy Hill, our new director. As we continue in exploring alternative / authentic assessments, one question stated, let's see from the chat, if approval is, and I know you mentioned just now even that response to the previous question, that if learning outcomes are changed, then they must go through some sort of curriculum board review, for example. One person stated, if approval is required for the course assessment at the start of the semester, how could we make a change and introduce a new type of assessment halfway through the teaching? So let's say, and I know in this particular university, persons may submit their assessments, or at least their assessment plans, at the beginning of the semester. And this is during this current dispensation with the pandemic and remote teaching and learning. And I think what they're asking is, if it has to go through that approval process at the beginning of the semester, how can they then change it as the semester progresses and teaching takes place? Do you have any?
I love this question.
Yeah? Sure.
And I love it because my answer is your assessment can be formative. It doesn't have to be graded. So you can add in a quiz. You could add in a test and just not record it. But it still serves as a point of feedback to let students know how they're performing and let you know where they still may need additional support collectively. So you can add a test, a quiz, an alternative assessment, anything. Just don't record the grade.
Yes.
And here, actually, technology is very useful at being efficient about that, using a survey monkey to ask students their perceptions of whether they would know the answers to the questions and rate it on a scale from 1 to 5.
Definitely.
And you'll see where they feel confident answering a question, where they don't, and you don't have to grade the answer. So low stakes, no stakes assessments can be added at any time and just not included, but be part of the learning activities in the class or part of the homework.
I like what you said there. It's a nice little catchphrase. Low stakes, no stakes. Low stakes, no stakes.
No stakes assessments.
I think that's a very nice teaching point right there for all educators, that there's informal assessment, so it's not necessarily graded. I think, and maybe perhaps, and you could chime in as well, perhaps taking a game-based approach, some sort of educational activity might help. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's very hard to design those. So the assignment can tell the students to design the game.
Yes.
What questions do they want to ask each other, right? And you can put this into, there's a software called Kahoot, K-H-A, Kahoot.
Yeah.
Yes, and they can create the games and gamification themselves, and they like to compete and they like to win and get the most right answers. But I have my students make those quizzes for each other.
Oh, nice.
Because I don't have time to think up those questions because I don't know where their questions are at. So when I see what questions they make, I understand where they still need more conversation.
I like that. I like that. Definitely. I think and it places the learning experience more in the hands of the students. Yeah? So clearly assessment seems to be a big point here. Another person stated, how can we balance providing guidance and assessments without being overly prescriptive? Students enter the working world where they receive little guidance on tasks and need to figure out how to proceed. So that sort of critical thinking, being able to think on the feet and so on. And I think this attendee is saying that if we become too prescriptive and really give them everything that they need, then are we doing more of a disservice? Yeah?
Sure. Well, one, I hope in the workplace that employers are equally explicit about their expectations, but that's not always the case. I think in this environment, we have to be realistic about the complexity we expect students to manage. So, this semester I had a student ask, could you please summarize the readings? No, absolutely, I cannot. That's literally your job as a student in the course. And so if you're not understanding the readings, I can give you guidance on reading comprehension and reading for meeting and these sorts of things and help you with the process of doing that yourself. But I cannot do the reading summaries for you because that's where the learning is happening.
Yes.
Right. So I think making the distinction between them, and this has to do with active learning strategies, having them articulate, how are you going to go about doing that when you don't know how to do it? That's what you can give feedback on. And that's what you can be explicit about. But I agree, we shouldn't be doing the work for them.
Yes, definitely. And I guess it's, again, the principle of being the guide on the side and not the sage on the stage, yeah? So thank you for that. Perhaps we can just take two more questions on assessments, and then we can proceed to some of the other questions. Someone, I think, needs more, is asking for more details on flexible deadlines. If a student, for example, takes 5 courses at a time, how would the flexible deadlines concept work? Could you shed some additional details on that or light on that, please?
Sure. And I can say it doesn't work to just say submit these things whenever you want, because you as the educator don't have time to give feedback before the next assignment's due. And feedback is only valuable if it's close to the time of submission. Further away from the time of submission, the less valuable it is to the learner. So it doesn't work to be flexible too much. Yes. But for example, if a student it comes to you and says, I'm experiencing migraines this week, have the compassion to believe the student. If they are lying about it, they have a reason. So the answer is yes, of course, you have an extra 48 hours. Right? So this is about, whereas before we would be punitive because we were trying to teach them how to behave in the real world, the real world is also becoming more compassionate, and particularly as a result of COVID-19, because we've shown up at work as our whole selves for the first time in a long time for most cultures. So the flexibility is not handed in whenever you want. It's about the compassion to realize our students are going through a lot. And telling them, listen, as the educator or my graduate students, if you have teaching assistants, they need time to do this work as well.
Yes.
And we need you to progress with the whole course or you won't finish on time. Yes. So there's a balance there, but telling your students to say, don't pull an all-nighter to submit this at 11:59, right? It's about having deadlines that model the health and wellness we want them to have. I don't want them to stay up till midnight working on a paper. So that flexibility is also in how we aren't punitive, right? Taking 5 points off of a paper because it's 20 minutes late doesn't reflect the learning. It's not in the learning objective to be on time with the assignments. So what is it teaching them? How does that align to your learning objectives? And if you can be flexible on that and still rigorous on the outcomes, that's the purpose.
Yeah. So it's about getting that balance, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And as we're on that, and thank you for that response as well to that question. It segues nicely into another question on alternative assessments. There are some who feel that alternative assessments can allow for more cheating by students as opposed to traditional proctored assessments. Can you share your views on that? Do you share those views, or do you think there's things that can be done to mitigate against that?
Yeah, this is an important question. And COVID-19 has revealed the vulnerability in academic integrity in the institution of higher education. Alternative assessments can be designed in a way that measure learning and aren't constructed to worry about the teaching, right? The way we do proctored high stakes exams, we know aren't the best for the students and don't necessarily reflect the skills that are in the learning objectives for the course. So the alternative assessments can be constructed in a way where quote unquote cheating isn't the problem. So for example, an 8-hour open book exam that's take home. Maybe you assign it in teams of 2 so that they are allowed to talk to someone. Or how can you lean into the assessment so that it's measuring learning rather than trying to prevent teaching? So the mini mind map is a great example. How can you create a rubric for that measures the learning, and perhaps potentially, for example, ask for a draft or an earlier submission so that the student can't cheat, that shows the process over time of constructing that mind map. And so the alternative assessments can be designed to measure learning rather than constructed to fight cheating.
Right.
And quite frankly, the student who is going to cheat will find a way to cheat no matter what the assessment is.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, you're definitely right. And I guess that's where students might be innovative, yeah? Speaking of innovation. As we move from assessments and maybe more to other pedagogical practices and so on, we have some questions there, just a few. One person said, from what is being said, academics are clearly no longer the gatekeepers of information. So what will be different in their pedagogical orientation to motivate students? In other words, what can academics or lecturers or teachers generally, what can they do or we do to motivate students? Because we know that the research has shown that motivation is tantamount to learning. So how can teachers or educational practitioners provide that motivation for students' learning?
This is such an important question. And I have 2 pieces of advice related to this. Number 1 is connect your course content to their prior knowledge. Find out about your learners. If you have 200 of them, you can still do this through surveys and polls. You can ask them to write reflective statements about why they're in the course. What do they need to learn? Most of them will start with because this is a required course, but then you can ask them to go beyond that and dig in. So have them connect themselves to the course content.
Yes.
Ask them, what do you want to see in this course? And collect that information. Report it back to them so they feel seen. This builds community in the classroom, makes them feel motivated to show up as learners. The second one relates to those authentic assessments, linking this to the real world employability they anticipate having. Now, this is easier to do in technical and vocational areas, but it applies just as well in the liberal arts. Imagining where your content will play out in the real world, and how can you make assignments and learning activities around that. This deeply motivates the students.
Yes.
And again, you don't have to think this up. You can ask them, what do you want to learn in this class? You have your learning objectives and your content you have to get through, especially if your course is a prerequisite, but they can participate in the learning process. We can emancipate that for them, and that motivates them.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that. I think we can probably just take about 2 more questions. And
Sure.
one of them happens to be, this is a good one, I think. Well, all of the questions are pretty good. But this question asks, how do we help students to overcome their anxiety of virtual learning? And the reason I'm saying this is quite an important question because of the current landscape of education, of course, but also, it is also often assumed that students, especially when they are millennials and beyond, they are naturally inclined to technology or virtual teaching and learning, but that may not necessarily be so. And if I may, just as appendage to that attendee's question, so that person asks, how do we help students to overcome their anxiety of learning, virtual learning? And I would also venture to say, how do we help teachers to overcome any sort of anxiety towards virtual teaching or virtual instruction?
And this is a very important question. And I don't know that they'll overcome it if they really do have a fear or a concern around it, but we can help them mitigate blocking the learning. And so part of this comes from our own neurodiversity, right? I once had a colleague tell me they were on the Asperger's spectrum, and they had no idea how to pick up social cues in Zoom. And they'd worked very hard to do that face-to-face, but they were very worried about understanding what their students were thinking or saying in the Zoom environment, on the screen, in the E environment. And just talking about what is good pedagogy. How do we use the emojis, the chat, and the breakout rooms to engage them in different ways so that we can support a variety of different types of participation. But the other thing is we need to build community in the classroom. It's really important to do this in the first 10 days, but you can also stop at the midway point and say, I want us to be a better community in this classroom, right? And part of this is telling the students they belong, because many of them question whether they do. So if you show you have confidence in them and you stay present in the course and continue to reflect that confidence, it really does make a difference. This can come through quick audio messages you send out through the LMS, just telling everyone, I see you working hard, I see you downloading the readings or whatever have you, keep it up, I'm proud of you. We don't normally talk to our students that way, but right now, it's part of the pastoral care they need in a very disrupted context.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. I think those are useful tips. Again, what I like is the practicality of it all, Before we move on to our last question for this evening, we would just like we're asking for your cooperation, everyone, the attendees here with us. We're asking for your cooperation in helping us assess the very first virtual UWI Guardian Group Premium Open Lecture. As you know, this is the first time we're doing it. So we value your feedback, your voice. So the link has been shared in the chat, and we welcome your feedback and ask that you please complete the brief survey before leaving the stream. What we can do to improve, even some suggestions for the next iteration of this event. All right? As we proceed to the last question for this evening, in this particular segment, Dr. Gleason, one of the things that this pandemic and the transition to remote teaching and learning has been accompanied by economic turbulence, So my question really is, how can we be innovative in light of the current economic turbulence? So for example, we know that some school institutions may not have the finances or the capital necessary to invest in any sort of large technology device, hardware or software or licenses. But how innovative can we be in light of a restricted economic climate as it pertains to teaching and learning?
I love this question because it gets to my earlier point about the inequality of access that COVID-19 has made worse. And there are some really great stories of innovations in this space. There are lists online of low bandwidth activities that you can do asynchronously or synchronously. The Google Doc is a good example. You do need Wi-Fi or access to the internet to use the Google Doc, but you can come in and out of it and not lose your work. So that's one I really like. But you can also send audio messages to your students, create transcripts from recorded lectures so that they can use those instead of stream the video. So they may not be able to stream your video, but they can easily download the PDF.
Yes.
It's less bandwidth and doesn't require synchronous access. You can also be flexible on, cameras off. Yes, we want to see their faces and we want them to see each other, but they may not be able to afford both having the camera on and hearing you at the same time. They'll have to choose between the two. And in that case, we want them to hear the conversation.
Yes.
The other thing is back channeling, which has sort of emerged in COVID-19, and it's awesome. So back channeling happens in the chat when you're in a Zoom environment where there's a simultaneous conversation going on. So in my class earlier today, there was 200 comments in the chat from 16 students while we were talking. So it enabled much more conversation. And what you can do for that back channeling is use WhatsApp, so that, or whatever free texting platform you're using, WeChat or something else.
Yes.
But I also tell my students I won't be in that group so that they can ask each other questions they wouldn't want to ask me. And so that's a free way for them to communicate with each other and not have to open the learning management system. If everything is on the LMS, then you're waiting for the access to electricity, a device, bandwidth, and data. That's 4 hurdles to getting to the course material. So this is why using alternative media as some of your learning tools, TED Talks and these sorts of things, decreases the barrier to access on the LMS. So if you can email that information alternatively, or you don't need to create a second website, but what are the other ways in which people can send each other information? These are things to keep in mind. And then survey your students. Ask them what their biggest challenge is. If it is bandwidth, then you know you need to send out transcripts of your lectures so that they can read them instead of listen to the lecture.
Yes.
They can't afford to stream it. There are many other solutions to troubleshoot this really important question.
Yes.
So I would encourage participants to keep digging for answers on this one.
Thank you so much for that. And I think, you know, one of the recurring suggestions that you're saying is for many of the questions, I think one of the common thread, if I may say so, is really reaching out to students and asking students instead of just assuming or guessing or shooting in the dark, but really asking students, what do they think? How do they feel? What are their expectations? And I think that allows for a more direct strategic approach when it comes to instruction. Yeah? So thank you so much for that, Dr. Gleason, and for answering all of those questions. I know there were many, and there are many more, but you know, for time's sake, we can't get to all of them. One of the questions that came up very recently, I think your recent response included, you know, answered that question as well, as it pertained to access issues and that sort of thing. So thank you so much for that. And I do hope that your responses and your tips and your presentation, along with all that you have said, are beneficial to all educational stakeholders in really making teaching and learning more than just a process, but an experience, a deep level experience for the recipients of teaching, and those being our students. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our question and answer segment. Again, thank you, Dr. Gleason, for your insight, for the information, for the tips, and all that you provided us with today. And for you, our attendees, we greatly appreciate your input and hearing your voice on such relevant issues. And I hope that you got some insight on the way forward. Yeah? At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite Mr. Mark Garcia, Research Technician at the CETL, UWI St. Augustine, to offer the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach the close of this Premium Open Lecture 2021, Navigating the Realm of the E-Classroom, Creating Effective Culture for Innovation and Change, I have been given the privilege of extending sincere gratitude on behalf of the UWI St. Augustine Campus, Guardian Group, the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and by extension the UWI Guardian Group Premium Open Lecture Committee to the persons that have contributed to the success of this grand event. I will begin by saying a heartfelt thanks to our incredible speakers, Professor Brian Copeland, Campus Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor, UWI St. Augustine, Mr. Anand Pascal, President, Guardian Life of the Caribbean, Dr. Leroy Hill, Director, Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, UWI St. Augustine. A special thank you to our distinguished lecturer and featured speaker, Dr. Nancy Gleason, Director, Hilary Ballon Center for Teaching and Learning and Associate Professor of Practice in Political Science at New York University, Abu Dhabi. Dr. Justin Zefrin, our Master of Ceremonies this evening, and our talented artists, Miss Janea Clark for her moving invocation, and Mr. Emmanuel Joseph for that captivating musical performance on the steel pan. As you can imagine, an event such as this requires careful and dedicated planning, and in this regard, I express appreciation to the Office of the Campus Principal, the Office of the Deputy Campus Principal, the Marketing and Communications Office, staff of Guardian Group, and staff of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. I must also acknowledge and thank the Premium Open Lecture Committee, Dr. Justin Zefrin, Chair of the committee, Dr. Leroy Hill and Mrs. Nisha Byron Holder of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, Ms. Kyra Kujo, Ms. Lisa Mahabia, and Ms. Keeley Ransom of Guardian Group, Dr. Simone Primus and Ms. Joy Smith of the Alma Jordan Library, Ms. Chanel Glasgow and Ms. Josanne Green of the UWI Marketing and Communications Office, Mrs. Deborah Souza Okpofabri of the Office of the Campus Principal, and Mr. Jarrell Alder of the Division of Student Services and Development. Finally, I would like to thank you, our valued audience and members of the media, for being present at this Premium Open Lecture. It has been a pleasure hosting and engaging with you this evening. On behalf of the UWI St. Augustine Campus and Guardian Group, we thank you all once again and do look forward to seeing you at the UWI Guardian Premium Awards next year. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings this evening's proceedings to a close. On behalf of the UE Guardian Group Premium Event Planning Committee, do have a good evening.